The stranded engineer, the bitter wind of Kepler-4 for to see howled through the canyon, carrying ice crystals that stung like needles against Alina Vasquez's visor. She pressed her back against the hull of her damaged ship, the Prometheus, and checked her suit's power levels again. 18%. Not good, but not the worst she'd faced in 23 days of being stranded on this frozen moon. Alina had always been good with her hands. Growing up in the engineering districts of New Angeles, she'd learned to fix anything that broke, from hover bikes to quantum processors. Now, at 34, she was one of the few humans certified to work on alien technology, specifically the advanced systems that kept humanity's deep space operations running. The irony wasn't lost on her that all her expertise meant nothing when her own ship was dead in the ice. The Prometheus had been her home for 3 years. A modified cargo hauler designed for long-range supply runs to the outer colonies. The ship wasn't pretty, but Alina had upgraded every system herself, turning it into one of the most reliable vessels in the Terran Freight Alliance. She knew every bolt, every circuit, every quirk of the old girl's personality. That's why what she'd discovered this morning made no sense. Someone had modified her ship. Alina pushed away from the hull and activated her suit's work lights. The modifications were subtle, professional, but definitely not her work. Additional shielding around the cargo bay, rerouted power conduits, and most puzzling of all, a small device attached to her navigation computer that she'd never seen before. The device hummed with an energy signature that didn't match any known human or alien technology. She pulled up the diagnostic readings on her wrist display. The device was definitely active, drawing power from the main systems even though the ship was supposedly dead. Alina frowned behind her visor. In her experience, when something didn't make sense, it usually meant someone was lying to you. But who would have access to her ship? And why modify it without telling her? The sound of shifting ice made her look up. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure watching her from the ridge above, silhouetted against the pale green aurora that danced across Kepler-4 for 2C's sky. Alina blinked, and the figure was gone. Probably just her imagination. After 3 weeks alone, the mind started playing tricks. She turned back to her work, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Alina had learned to trust her instincts during her years in deep space. Right now, those instincts were screaming that she wasn't alone on this moon. The Prometheus had crashed during what should have been a routine jump to the Vega system. Alina had been carrying a cargo of mining equipment and industrial components to the new colony on Vega Prime. The manifest showed standard stuff: atmospheric processors, drilling equipment, power generators. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would explain why her navigation computer had suddenly rerouted her jump to this frozen wasteland. Alina climbed back into the ship through the emergency airlock, grateful to escape the wind. The interior was only slightly warmer than outside, but at least the ice wasn't trying to freeze her visor. She made her way to the cargo bay, checking the seals on the shipping containers. Everything looked normal, but she decided to run a full inventory anyway. The first container held exactly what the manifest claimed: molecular drills and cutting equipment. The second contained power cells and fusion generators. But when Alina opened the third container, she found something that made her blood run cold. The components inside were sleek, black, and covered in symbols she didn't recognize. They hummed with the same energy signature as the device attached to her navigation computer. Alina's engineering training kicked in as she examined the components. Power regulators, targeting systems, some kind of exotic matter containment unit. This wasn't mining equipment. This was weapons technology. Alina sat back on her heels, mind racing. Someone had loaded her ship with military hardware and sent her to Vega Prime without telling her. But why, and who had the authority to falsify shipping manifests and cargo documentation? A sound from outside made her freeze. Footsteps in the snow, deliberate and measured. Alina grabbed her emergency beacon and moved to the small porthole. A figure in a thermal suit was approaching the ship, walking with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Elena's hand moved to the plasma cutter at her belt. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. She watched as the figure stopped about 10 meters from the ship and raised both hands in a universal gesture of peace. Then the figure reached up and removed their helmet. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The face looking back at her was her own, but older, weathered by years of hardship, marked by a scar that ran from the left temple to the corner of the mouth, but unmistakably her. The older Alina smiled sadly and called out, her voice carrying clearly across the thin air. "Hello, Alina. I know you have questions. I know you're scared. But I need you to listen very carefully, because the fate of two civilizations depends on what happens next." Alina stared through the porthole, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Time travel was theoretical at best, certainly not something that could be achieved with current human technology, but the evidence was standing right in front of her. "I know this is hard to believe," the older Alina continued, "but I'm you 12 years from now, and I'm the one who stranded you here." The impossible meeting. Lena's hands shook as she cycled through the airlock. Every rational part of her mind insisted this was impossible, but the evidence was walking around outside her ship. She stepped onto the ice, plasma cutter in hand, and faced the impossible. "Prove it," Alina said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Tell me something only I would know." The older Elena's smile was tinged with sadness. "You were 7 when you built your first robot out of spare parts from Papa's workshop. You called it Benny, and you cried when Mama made you take it apart, because it kept walking into walls. You never told anyone that you'd actually programmed it to do that because you thought it was funny." Elena's grip on the plasma cutter loosened. That memory was buried deep, something she'd never shared with anyone. That ... that could be lucky guessing. The scar on your shoulder from the plasma leak on Station Epsilon. You told the medics. You were checking a routine repair, but you were actually trying to impress Marcus Chen by showing off. You've never forgiven yourself for being so stupid, even though no one else was hurt. Alina lowered the plasma cutter completely. No one knew about that incident, not the real story. She'd buried it in her official reports, carried the guilt alone for years. "I'm you, Alina," the older woman said gently. "I'm you from a timeline where I didn't have the chance to make this choice, where I delivered that cargo to Vega Prime and watched the galaxy burn because of it." "The components in the cargo bay," Alina said, understanding beginning to dawn. "They're not for mining. No, they're key components for a quantum singularity. Weapon. The kind that can tear a planet apart from the inside out." The older Elena's face hardened. "In my timeline, those components were delivered to what we thought was a mining colony. Instead, they were assembled into the weapon that destroyed the Zephyrian homeworld." Alina felt the blood drain from her face. The Zephyrians, but they're not even hostile. They're just ... different. Different enough that some humans decided they were a threat. Different enough that the Terran hegemony decided to commit genocide rather than risk coexistence. The older Elena's voice carried years of pain. 3 billion Zephyrians died in an instant. Their moon colonies, their generation ships, their entire civilization, gone. Elena sank to her knees in the snow. The weight of what she was hearing threatened to crush her. But I'm just a freight hauler. I don't have anything to do with military operations. That's what made you perfect for the job. Clean record, no military connections, no reason for anyone to suspect you were carrying weapons instead of mining. Equipment. The older Elena knelt beside her younger self. Director Cross of the Hegemony's Special Projects Division selected you personally. He knew you'd never question the cargo manifest, never dig deeper than the paperwork. Cross, Elena whispered. She remembered the man who'd given her the job, friendly, professional, offering a bonus for discretion about the cargo. She'd been so focused on the credits that she hadn't asked the right questions. I need to show you something, the older Elena said, standing and gesturing toward a ridge in the distance. The reason I was able to come back, the reason I was able to strand you here, it's not just about preventing the delivery, it's about giving humanity a different choice. Elena followed her older self across the frozen landscape. The aurora overhead painted everything in shades of green and blue, creating an otherworldly beauty that seemed at odds with the terrible conversation they were having. As they walked, the older Elena explained how she'd discovered the truth about the cargo, how she'd tried to warn the authorities, only to find that the weapon program went all the way to the top of the Hegemony's command structure. I tried everything, the older Elena said as they climbed a rocky outcropping, whistleblowing, sabotage, even attempted assassination of the project leaders. Nothing worked. The weapon was completed, deployed, and the Zephyrians were wiped out in a matter of hours. But if they're all dead, how did you get access to time travel technology? Elena asked, breathing hard in the thin air. Because the Zephyrians weren't the only ones who died. The quantum singularity weapon was unstable. It tore a hole in space-time itself, creating a cascade effect that threatened to destroy the entire Vega system. The Hegemony had to evacuate 12 colonies, and in the chaos, I managed to get my hands on some Zephyrian temporal technology. They reached the top of the ridge, and Elena gasped. Below them, nestled in a natural crater, was a device unlike anything she'd ever seen. It was roughly spherical, about the size of a small shuttle, and it pulsed with the same energy signature as the mysterious components in her cargo bay. But where those components felt cold and dangerous, this device radiated a warm, almost living energy. This is a chrono-stabilizer, the older Elena explained. Zephyrian technology designed to create stable temporal loops for studying quantum mechanics. I've been using it to create a pocket of time around this moon, a bubble where the same day repeats until I can find a way to change what happens. Elena stared at the device in wonder. How long have you been here? 12 years. I've lived this day thousands of times, trying to find the right approach, the right words to convince you. This is the first time I've gotten this far without you shooting me or running back to the ship. 12 years, Elena repeated, horrified. You've been trapped here for 12 years. Not trapped, choosing to stay. Each loop gives me another chance to get it right, another chance to save both civilizations. The older Elena's voice carried a determination that Elena recognized from her own darkest moments. Because I've seen what happens if I fail. I've seen the war that follows the Zephyrian genocide. I've seen humanity become everything we swore we'd never be. Elena looked at the device, then at her older self. What do you need me to do? I need you to trust me. I need you to believe that sometimes the only way to save everyone is to make the hard choice, even when it means sacrificing what you want. Most, the older Elena's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I need you to help me find a way to prevent the war without destroying the timeline itself. Elena felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. She thought about the cargo in her ship, about the Zephyrians she'd never met, about the billions of lives hanging in the balance. She thought about the younger woman she'd been, just an hour ago, focused on nothing more complicated than fixing her ship and getting home. That woman was gone forever. In her place stood someone who had to choose between two civilizations. "Show me," Elena said quietly. "Show me everything." The older Elena smiled, and for the first time since Elena had seen her, the expression reached her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for listening." As they descended toward the Chronos stabilizer, Elena felt the weight of the future pressing down on her. She was about to learn secrets that would change everything she thought she knew about humanity's place in the galaxy. But she was also about to discover that sometimes the most impossible problems required the most impossible solutions. The device pulsed brighter as they approached, as if it sensed the momentous decision that was about to unfold. Elena took a deep breath of the thin, cold air and prepared to face a future she'd never imagined. The real work was just beginning.